Hi, my name is Hunter Bensman, and my Flashpoint topic is the Black Hawk Down episode in Somalia in 1993, also known as the Battle of Mogadishu. So, some background for this event. In 1991, Muhammad Siad Barre was overthrown in a coup by major warlords in Somalia. And one of the warlords was Ali Mahdi Muhammad, who would become the president. The other one was Muhammad Farah Aidid, who was the main instigator in this event. So this coup led into a civil war in Somalia between the two major warlords, these warlords. This war caused a lot of famine. The crops weren't good, and it just kind of decimated the country. And over the course of 1991 and 1992, 300,000 Somalis starved to death. So in April of 1992, the United Nations implemented Operation Provide Relief to Somalia, and this basically sent aid and food to the Somalians. But the Somali militias violated the ceasefire that they had in order to provide the food, and they would ambush the convoys and steal the food, and that way they would be able to control the country by having the food in the country. And in response to this, on December 9th, 1992, George Bush Sr. He decided to put troops into Somalia to protect the shipments, the aid, and to make sure people got the food. And at its height, there were 25,000 troops, U.S. troops in Somalia to do this. But soon after, Bill Clinton became president in January of 1993, and he quickly reduced the amount of troops there. And by June of 1993, there were only 1,200 troops remaining in Somalia. But also at this time, the United Nations had placed troops there too, so there were 28 other countries who had troops in Somalia also protecting the food. But the stance kind of changed when 24 Pakistani soldiers were ambushed and killed by Aidid's militia. And this was clearly a planned attack, a planned ambush, and the United Nations was furious. So in response to this, they passed a resolution which basically made Aidid an outlaw, and they made their main goal to apprehend him and his associates, everyone involved in the attack. To help with this, the United States implemented Task Force Delta with 400 soldiers, special operations soldiers, and this happened in late August. So they came to Somalia, and over the course of September, they had 6 missions that they went on, and they captured some of his associates, but they failed to catch Aidid, and this leads into the event itself, which happens on October 3rd. So the Battle of Mogadishu happened on October 3rd and 4th, 1993. So the task force assigned here was made up of the United States Army Rangers and Task Force Delta. Both of them combined, they were called UNITAF, the Unified Task Force. So their plan was to have the Delta in the Blackhawks roped down onto the building of the Olympic Hotel in Mogadishu, and their plan was to go down onto the hotel, enter the building, and to capture the Aidid and his associates in the building. And then they would leave with the support of the Rangers, who had made a perimeter around the building and a few blocks surrounding. And they would leave, and they would be in and out in 30 minutes was their plan. But this did not happen, as it ended up taking 17 hours. And everything started to go wrong when Private Todd Blackburn fell out of one of the helicopters, and he was injured very badly. So 3 of the Humvees had to go off course and help him to get back to safety. So they did successfully capture Aidid's associates, but they found out that Aidid was not there. So their intelligence was wrong in this area. But they did capture the associates, and they got him back out of the hot zone. So shortly after this, one of the Black Hawks was shot down. One of the helicopters was shot down. And there were many injured people. And there's a policy of that they had called No Man Left Behind. And it was basically, if someone goes down, you're going to save him, you're going to bring him back to camp, even if it puts yourself in harm's way. So the caravan, the convoy, had to turn around and do their best to save the people in the wreckage. But what happened was there were hundreds of Somalis in the streets firing at them constantly. So many people were getting hit. So they were putting themselves in serious danger to rescue the 5 or 6 people in the crash, who were most likely severely injured or possibly dead. So this kind of brings up an interesting question. If they had not gone back, if this had not been their policy, they could have escaped with the hostages with a few casualties. But this became a lot worse and put a lot more people in danger because of this. So a major reason why this happened is because Major General William Garrison was desperate. He had planned on being in Somalia for only 3 weeks, but at this point he was there for 6 weeks. So twice the amount of time that they had planned, and it was not going their way. So they had received intelligence that Aidid would be here, but it was faulty intelligence. And later they would figure out that it was most likely a setup by Aidid. He knew that the helicopters were a major weakness for the United States, and they decided to target them. And it was clear by the sheer amount of people they had on the ground, on buildings, ready to fight, and the RPGs, rocket propelled grenades, used to shoot them down. So the convoy went back to get the survivors of the helicopter, but 30 minutes after the first one was shot down, a second one was shot down. And then they were ordered to loop back and find the other one. And two of the U.S. soldiers arrived at the second site, and they defended it. They defended the pilot, who was still alive, though severely wounded. And they gave their lives to defend the pilot. And the pilot later got captured by Aidid's men. And I'll show you a clip from the movie made on this event, Black Hawk Down, 2001, directed by Ridley Scott. I'll show you a clip about that event later. But 11 days after he was captured, he was released. And then in this event, the United Nations eventually sent help, but it wasn't until much later, till the next morning. And finally, after 17 hours, UNITAF, the Unified Task Force, entered the safe zone, and it was the end of the conflict. So the aftermath of this event, it left 18 American soldiers dead, 84 U.S. soldiers wounded, and this is the most since any battle since Vietnam. It also had 13 United Nations casualties, injured and killed, and over 1,000 Somalis were killed, and a lot of them were women and children, civilians. And a very crazy thing about this event is there were small children, 10, 12 years old, with guns, and they were shooting down United States troops, and they were in there with the men, and that's ridiculous. And then this event here, I'm sorry, it's very graphic, but this was broadcast all over the world. Everyone in the world saw this. American soldiers were dragged through the streets of Somalia and just publicly shamed, and they were defiled. And it was really hard for the United States to see this. So the long-term aftermath of this is Clinton immediately decides to withdraw all troops, all support from Somalia, and the United Nations followed soon after, and they removed everything, all the troops. But the Civil War continued until ID dies, 1996. They were still fighting, but ID died in 1996, and yeah. And then for the United States, they returned to an isolationist point of view after this, because obviously they don't want to get involved in putting their soldiers in harm's way like this again. And this stance lasted until 9/11, obviously, and then that changed the country's perspective in a completely different way. So some moral and ethical considerations about this event. First off, the United States was ignorant about the Somalian culture. I wanted to show you this. This is a picture of a helicopter, and the United States soldiers would sit with their feet dangling out. And the Somalis, one of the most insulting things you can do in their culture is show you the bottom of their feet. And it's very interesting how when they're flying over the city, the entire country, they're showing the soles of their feet to the entire nation. And obviously this wasn't on purpose, this wasn't a malicious act, but it just shows the United States wasn't there primarily to, or at least the Delta Task Force was not here primarily to help these Somali people. It was there to apprehend Aidid and get involved in their civil war. It was not primarily to, protect them or to become friendly with them. The other thing is they put civilians in harm's way, especially in the Battle of Mogadishu. They mowed down civilians, not knowing if they were armed or not. Many civilians died in the event, and obviously it was to protect themselves. They didn't know who was armed, where they were, who wasn't armed. But even just going into Mogadishu with this plan put so many civilians in harm's way. Knowingly, they did that. Yeah, and the other thing is the Somalian Civil War is their civil war to fight. It should be their civil war to fight, and the United States put themselves in the heat of it, and they picked a side and they fought against Aidid, and that wasn't right for them to do. And then the other ethical thing is, just the women and children being there, fighting. That's very concerning. So, a critique of the United States and the United Nations decisions. Um, there were many moments throughout them being in Somalia where the United States and the United Nations should have realized uh, we're doing something wrong. Um, Maybe we should approach this a little differently. Um, so, the main turning point for this is after the 24 Afghani soldiers were killed by Aidid's men. Uh, the resolution the United Nations passed um, to basically outlaw Aidid and put, you know, a bounty on his head and say we're going after him no matter what. That was a huge mistake. That was a turning point that made it no longer about peacekeeping and providing aid to Somalia. It made it about getting revenge on Aidid and hopefully bringing back, you know, peace to Somalia. Um, like the belief that everything would go back to normal once Aidid was apprehended is fantastical. There was no evidence for that whatsoever. There was still a war-torn country. You know, going after this one man isn't going to solve anything. Um, and if I were to give, you know, my opinion on what should have been done, they should have remained neutral in this stance. They should have had the troops there to protect the food and the supplies, but they shouldn't have taken a side. They shouldn't have fought within the civil war. Just remaining neutral, having troops there to protect the food, making sure civilians get the resources they need. That's a perfectly just stance to take. That's a very righteous cause, and they failed in that sense because they picked a side and they made a mess out of it. So I wanted to address the Black Hawk Down movie, the 2001 film directed by Ridley Scott. This was based on a book by Mark Bowden, a journalist, called Black Hawk Down, A Story of Modern War. This was made in 1999, and it had many first-hand accounts of the incident. I also watched a lot of interviews with the people involved, and what I concluded is that the movie is very true to what the events that happened. Like some bizarre details are even included, where a man's thumb gets blown part the way off, or just the actions of, you know, the man falling out of a helicopter. Everything is pretty accurate in the movie, but I will say it's very gruesome, very intense movie, but I found a lot of value in it. There were a lot of moments in it where it made me just kind of shocked that these Americans were subjected to 17 hours of brutal combat, and it could have all been avoided. But that's just the reality of what happened. So now I wanted to show you the clip from the movie, and what's happening here is the pilot has just been captured, and Aidid's men are talking to him, and the dialogue here is just very interesting, very telling of the situation. So I want to show you that.
You all live long, dull, and interesting lives. What do you want with me? You have taken hostages. We have you.
The government will never negotiate for me.
Then perhaps you and I can negotiate. Eh? Soldier to soldier.
I'm not in charge.
Course not. You have the power to kill but not negotiate. In Somalia, killing is negotiation. Do you really think if you get General Hadid, we will simply put down our weapons and adopt American democracy? That the killing will stop? We know this. Without victory, there can be no peace. There will always be killing, you see? This is how things are in our world.
So, an overall evaluation of the situation. So, first of all, here's the Delta Task Force, some of the 400 people sent in by the United States to take on Aidid and to capture his associates. And this is a picture of children on top of the wreckage of the Black Hawk. Overall, a situation that could have been avoided. Did not have to happen, but within the event there were many heroes, and that it would be a disservice not to mention them. The two people who sacrificed themselves to save the pilot, those are just a couple. There were so many other people who protected each other, saved each other, helped each other escape. And just a lot of violence, a lot of death, but the no man left behind policy is very admirable, especially when there are people who die for the other people who are injured or even dead. So that's interesting. But this whole event changed the course of United States foreign policy. It made us increasingly isolationist until 9/11, and a very important event in United States history. So, thanks for listening.